What Christmas gift did you receive when you were 2 years old? Most likely, you don't remember. If you do, you win the award, right? I certainly don't remember, so I looked up what are the best Christmas gifts in 2024 for 2-year-olds. And here's a few of the items that I found. They're going to put them on the screens for you. The first one is the Goliath Jelly Blocks Creative Kit. Now, you'll notice somebody standing on these blocks, and the reason is because they're squishy. They stretch. They're like, foamy type substance. So which is brilliant because if you're a parent and you've ever walked through the house in the dark, there's a chance you've stepped on one of those bricks, right? And it kind of made you go dancing. So there's the Goliath Jelly Blocks Creative Kit. Here's another one. The John Deere Build-A-Buddy Johnny Tractor Toy. Because let's be honest, if a tractor has eyeballs and a mouth, it's got to be fun, right? It's got to be fun. Here's another one. The Fisher-Price Little People Toddler Caring for Animals Farm. Now, I love Fisher-Price, and I'm not a toy expert, but I do have to wonder, is it possible that a shorter name for your toy would be a good idea? Just a thought. Here's another one. The Crayola Washable Palm Grip Crayons, right? This is awesome. This is brilliance in toy making because they thought about the reality we all have faced, and that is when the crayon gets shoved up the kid's nose. You know what I'm saying? So this prevents that problem. One more. Check this out. The Radio Flyer Amazon Delivery Van Ride-On Toy. That van shows up to my house too often as it is. I don't need a toy to remind me about it. Those are the popular toys, or at least some of them, this year for 2-year-olds. But what about when Jesus was 2 years old? Well, this morning we're continuing our series, The Gifts of Christmas, by looking at the gifts that Jesus received whenever he was 2 years old. And we're going to begin this morning in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2 with a group of men that are commonly referred to as the wise men. Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, it says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. Now, the words wise men in the Greek are actually the word Magi. And reflecting on some of Rick Renner's writing on the Christmas story, we discover some powerful insights from these wise men from eastern lands. You see, the Magi, as they were known, were a group of wealthy priests that devoted their time to interpreting dreams and studying the stars. And verse 1 tells us that they came from eastern lands. Now, we don't know exactly where they came from, but most likely, most theologians and scholars believe that they either came from Babylon or from Persia or from Arabia. Whichever one of these locations they came from, the Magi would have had to travel at least 1,000 miles or up to 1,200 miles to get to where Jesus was. And that journey was not a short journey. Remember, this is the time when there are no vehicles, there are no airplanes, there is no quick mode of transportation. It is likely that it took these Magi anywhere from 3 to 12 months. Why? Because not only did they have to travel a long distance, but they traveled in large caravans. Now, I know a lot of times in a nativity scene, we see 3 wise men, and people assume that because there were 3 gifts that they brought. But the reality is, we don't know how many Magi actually showed up whenever they came to see Jesus. But what we do know from history is that oftentimes Magi would travel in large caravans with camels and other animals to carry all of their provisions. In addition to that, they also brought a workforce with them. And that workforce would set up their tents and disassemble their tents. Not only that, they would bring bodyguards with them and even an army with them at times, sometimes made up of hundreds of people. This was no small caravan. This is one reason why, again, the Magi arrived nearly 2 years after Jesus was born. Now, I know in our nativity scene we see, we see the baby Jesus, and we see Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the angel and all the animals and the wise men. Truth is, the wise men showed up much later. So get the picture. This is who arrives in Jerusalem. Key note there, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. That's another reason why we know they showed up later. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. The Magi show up in Jerusalem. And when they do, what they say is significant when they enter the city. Look what it says, Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 2. They enter the city. Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. This is what the Magi are saying when they enter the city. King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. Now, why would King Herod be deeply disturbed on hearing the news of the Magi whenever they enter Jerusalem? Why would he be deeply disturbed whenever he hears them saying, "Where is this newborn king?" There's 2 reasons why they would have been deeply disturbed. First off, King Herod was disturbed by the Magi's visit. Not just what they said, but by the Magi's visit. Why? Because the Magi were wealthy, powerful, and influential, so much so that they could actually create trouble for kings. Let me give you an example. On one occasion, Magi accompanied a king who was coming to give tribute to the Roman Emperor Nero. When Nero received news of their coming, he became so alarmed that the Magi were coming that he forgot about the very king who was coming to give him tribute. Why would Nero be alarmed about the Magi? Here's the reason why. Many believed that the Magi were king makers, meaning they were the ones who crowned new kings. So if Magi ever showed up unannounced, suddenly you're wondering, is there a new king? Am I about to lose my crown? So fear is struck in Nero's heart whenever the Magi show up. And so what does he do? He rolls out the red carpet for the Magi. He gives them extravagant gifts. And when they finally leave, he throws a party because they're finally gone. So get the picture. King Herod is deeply disturbed by the very presence of the Magi because their presence posed a threat to his reign and to his kingdom. Here's the second reason King Herod would have been deeply disturbed. Herod was disturbed by the Magi's question. Again, what was the question they asked as they entered Jerusalem? Where is the newborn king of the Jews? Why would that question disturb him? Well, first, in 39 BC, the Magi supported an uprising to overthrow Herod. Second, the Magi had the power and influence to cause problems for a king, and now here they are asking, where's the new king? Herod ain't the new king. So when he hears that, he gets scared. He starts wondering what's going on. And then third, here's just the reality. Herod was a very insecure leader. Why do I say that? Because Herod was so insecure about losing his power and position as king that he even went as far as to have his wife, his mother-in-law, and his 3 sons killed because he was afraid they would take his throne. That's why Roman Emperor Augustus once said, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son." Not only that, but when Herod was 70 years old, he ordered that the most distinguished citizens of Jerusalem be arrested and imprisoned, and that the moment he died, they should be killed. He didn't stop there. In addition to that, Herod commanded that upon his death, the oldest child in every home would be put to death, so there would be weeping, not celebration, upon Herod's death. Now, when he died, they didn't follow through on that, of course, right? So when Magi arrived in Jerusalem asking where the newborn king was, Herod is deeply disturbed. But notice, not only was Herod deeply disturbed, but it also said that the whole city was disturbed. Why? Because if the king ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Because if the king wasn't happy, it meant bloodshed. So, Herod is deeply disturbed by the Magi's visit and by the Magi's question. Let's keep reading. Verse 4. He, in other words, King Herod, called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Remember, the Magi, the wise men, were following a star whenever they came to Jerusalem. They're looking for the newborn king, the long-awaited Messiah. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too." Now, Herod's intention was not to worship the child. Herod's intention was to kill the child. He wanted to know when the star appeared so that he could reverse engineer how old the child was. He asked when the star appeared so he could figure out if the star appeared at this time and they've been traveling for this long, that means that this newborn king was likely born around this time, and he basically comes to the realization the child's probably about 2 years old. And so he eventually issues an order that every male child in and around Jerusalem that is 2 years old or younger be killed. Look what happens next, verse number 9. After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Think about the significance of this moment. The Magi were wealthy. The Magi were influential. The Magi were powerful. The Magi were king makers. And the Magi made kings tremble. And yet, here they are bowing down to a king. These are the guys kings were afraid of. But now they're bowing down to a king. Why? Because this isn't just any child, and this isn't just any king. This is what Scripture calls the King of Kings. The King of Kings. In fact, the phrase bow down and worship actually means to fall down and lie prostrate on the ground before a superior to give worship. Imagine somebody with so much power, so much wealth, so much influence, and this is their posture before a child. Before a child, because they recognize this is no ordinary child. This is a king. And that brings us to the gifts. At this point in Jesus' life, he's about 2 years old. And after the Magi bow and worship to Jesus, they present 3 gifts to him. But these weren't your normal 2-year-old gifts. You know what I'm talking about? Like, these weren't the squishy little, building blocks. This wasn't the John Deere tractor toy, okay? No, this is gifts on a whole nother level. Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, look what it says. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, here's what's interesting. If Magi gave gifts to a king, the gifts they gave were determined by the status of the king. Meaning, the greater the status, the greater the gift. If the status was great, then the size of the gift would also be great. The status of the king determined the size of the gift. So in this case, the size of the gifts were significant because this was no ordinary king. Look at the 3 gifts. The 3 gifts that Magi gave, the first one, number 1, was the gift of gold. Now, the word gold comes from a Greek word describing the purest form of gold. For gold to be pure, the rock was mined, and then it was crushed, and then the gold would be heated in a blazing furnace. And whenever the gold was heated in the blazing furnace, what happened? The dross, all of the impurities around the gold would rise to the surface. The gold worker would then scrape it off the top, and then he'd heat up the furnace even hotter. And then more impurities would rise to the top. They'd be scraped off, and then they'd heat it up again even more. They would do this over and over and over until they had scraped away all the impurities, and all you had left was the purest form of gold. This is one of the gifts that Magi brought to Jesus. Why gold? Because gold was symbolic of royalty, and that's who Jesus was. He was royalty sent from heaven. Here's the second gift they bring. That's the gift of frankincense. Frankincense was an expensive incense that was produced from the gum or resin of trees that grew in eastern lands. And here's the thing. It was very rare and thus very expensive. In fact, sometimes frankincense was even more expensive than gold. Frankincense, not only that, hear this, frankincense was the chief fragrance used in the temple in Jerusalem for worship. In fact, it was considered to be a substance so holy that Hebrew merchants were forbidden to sell it to pagans. And because its primary purpose was for priestly ministry, frankincense was the incense of deity. Number 3 is the gift of myrrh. Myrrh was an aromatic substance that also came from the resin of exotic trees in eastern lands. Again, very rare and yet very expensive. And because it smelled good, myrrh was often in demand among royalty because it was a perfume that they enjoyed the smell of. But here's the real significance of myrrh whenever it comes to Jesus. Myrrh was also used in the embalming process when a person died. Why? Because it counteracted the stench of the dead corpse. In other words, myrrh was symbolic of death and humanity. Do you see the significance of the 3 gifts? The Magi brought gold for his royalty, frankincense for his deity, and myrrh for his humanity. These were not random gifts. These were not random gifts that just happened to show up for a time where they're like, well, this is the best I got, I guess I'll give that. No, there was divine meaning and significance behind these very gifts in the first place. Not only that, think about what these gifts symbolized. This is huge. The Magi's gifts symbolize this. The gold symbolized Jesus as king. Remember, he's royalty. The frankincense symbolized Jesus as high priest. Remember, this was used in the worship in the temple. And the myrrh symbolized Jesus as savior of mankind. It was symbolic of his humanity, that he would one day die for our sin. Again, these were not haphazard gifts. Rather, they were sacrificial gifts of worship. And here's what I love most about verse 11. In the Amplified Version, this is how it says, verse 11. They presented to him gifts. I love this next phrase. Fit for a king. In other words, the Magi brought their very best to Jesus. So, let me conclude by asking a simple question, but yet a very important question this Christmas. What gift are you going to give Jesus this year for his birthday? Think about the ironic side of Christmas. On Christmas, what do? We give gifts to one another. We give gifts to family members. We give gifts to friends. Some of you even give gifts to people you don't even like. Right? We give gifts to everybody else. And yet it's no one else's birthday. It's Jesus' birthday. That's who we're celebrating. So, don't get me wrong, I don't have anything wrong with exchanging gifts, and we do that at our house, and I'm guessing you do at yours. There's nothing wrong with that. But where we miss it is that in our exchanging of gifts, we forget to give a gift to the one whose birthday it is. And you may say, well, how does that work? I mean, I can't physically give a gift to Jesus, and besides, what on earth would I give the God of the universe? The one who has everything. Maybe the gift you'll give is to do something for the least of these. In other words, Jesus said, when we do something for the poor, when we do something for the hungry, when we do something for the thirsty, what did he say? He said, when you do that, you do it for me. So perhaps this Christmas, the gift you need to give to Jesus is to do something for the hungry, the poor, the thirsty. Because when you serve them, he says, you serve me. Maybe the gift to give will be to invest in the advancement of Jesus' work in the world. We've shared with you over the last few weeks different missions opportunities that we've adopted at Seven City, and we've challenged you to partner with us in the work that we're doing in India, and 100% of that is going to that work to advance the gospel in a very needy place. That is an opportunity to give a gift that's going to advance the message of Jesus. And can I just tell you this? I've shared with you some missions projects at Seven City. I've shared with you about the work in India. I've shared with you about, we've talked about Angel Tree. We've talked about the toiletry drive. Like, these are different missions gifts or opportunities I presented to you. Let me just tell you right now. I right now have at least 6 other missions opportunities I haven't told you about, from missionaries who have contacted me and said, hey, we need help in this area. Can you help? Last year, we had such an incredible response of generosity from this congregation. I had this list of needs, and I was able to start calling those missionaries and say, yes, we can. And we started picking them off one after another, after another, after another. Listen, what I've presented to you is a need. I can just tell you right now, the need is far greater. Far greater. And generosity is what allows us to look at those needs and say, yeah, we can do something about that. We can do something about that. Maybe that's how or what gift you'll give this Christmas to Jesus. Or maybe the gift that you'll give will be your heart. Maybe today is the day where you surrender your life to the God who loves you and sent his son for you and gave his life for you. Maybe today is a day that you'll surrender your heart to the lordship of Jesus Christ, and you'll say, no longer is it about me, no longer is it about pursuing my thing. Jesus, I surrender to you. I give you my life. He wants that more than anything. Maybe today, the answer to the question, what are you going to give Jesus for his birthday? Maybe it's you. And this morning, I'd invite you to do that. Let's pray.